regolo io il volume. Adesso qua c'è devi spengere e poi finisce. I mean, but Pat, Pat, Pat. No, the volume I
Yeah,
will adjust.
that's fine.
The level is
Yeah.
not too high. Okay?
No, it's not too high.
Okay.
No.
You will be the first.
I'm the first.
Yeah.
Yeah. testing my microphone. I think we're good. Wonderful. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today for the launch of a new statement from the International Union of Superiors General, UISG. The title of our statement, and of course of today's event, is Sisters for the Environment, Integrating Voices from the Margins. So, without further ado, our first speaker is Sister Patricia Murray, Executive Secretary of UISG. Sister Patricia belongs to the Institute of the Blessed Virgin Mary, commonly known as Loreto Sisters, and she has led UISG since 2014. Inspired in her ministry by a lifelong commitment to justice, peace, and education, Sister Patricia previously served as Executive Director of Solidarity with South Sudan. Sister Patricia, the floor is yours.
It's nice to get a clap for the long walk. You'll hear my Irish accent, which I hope will be clear for everyone. As you know, UISG is a member organisation. So the members are the Superiors General of nearly 2,000 congregations worldwide. So we represent about 600,000 sisters on the ground. And the core mission is a mission of training, supporting, and connecting the members. So UISG acts as a kind of an umbrella organisation for sisters who are engaged in confronting some of the world's most pressing development issues. So as sisters, we are convinced of the need for an integrative, and inclusive approach to realising the UN 2030 agenda. So looking at the word integral, we are holistic in tackling social and environmental issues, advocating from a vision that is both human and spiritual as we seek sustainable solutions. Integrative, we build bridges. We're bridge builders. We bring people together. We cross frontiers. We cross barriers. We focus on our shared humanity as we journey towards a safe, just, and peaceful future for everyone, particularly for those on the margins of society. And inclusive, we want to leave no one behind, knowing that the world's most marginalized communities can teach us all the resilience required to confront the challenges of our time. And they will transform us if we really engage and encounter them. And that's our experience as sisters. When we meet those on the margins of life, they change us rather than we change them. They have much more to bring to the conversation at a global level. And as sisters, our very vowed life calls us to be prophetic. That is to stand with and to speak with and for those whose voices are ignored or whose voices are excluded. So Catholic sisters and their partners are at the forefront of a movement to shape global conversations around the needs of the most vulnerable communities on our planet. And it is in this spirit that UISG issues the statement, Sisters for the Environment, Integrating Voices from the Margins. Following the publication of Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si in 2015, the Catholic movement for environmental advocacy has gathered momentum year after year, mounting urgency because of the world's climate and biodiversity crisis. As the future of our planet hangs in the balance, we know that achieving the tipping point for change requires all people of goodwill to collaborate across borders and identities, setting aside differences to defend our common home. So this statement today embodies the spirit of cooperation and collaboration that we seek to promote, drawing on the relationships developed between the UISG, our partners, and funders. So the essence of this statement is based on the global experience of practical action and advocacy that has coalesced around UISG's environmental campaign, Sowing Hope for the Planet. This campaign was launched in 2018 and led so ably by Sister Sheila Kinsey. And the campaign has become a driving force within the Laudato Si movement and in the promotion of the Laudato Si Action platform. So Sowing Hope for the Planet has promoted and shared a multitude of initiatives and best practices that have been initiated by sisters in different parts of the world, together with their partners, in response to Pope Francis's encyclical letter. Further research and development has been led by sisters advocating globally. The UISG project, established in 2020 to support sisters in learning about advocacy and in channeling their exceptional grassroots engagements towards long-term systemic change. Key partners for the development of the UISG's environmental advocacy throughout 2020 have been the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development, known as CAFOD, the aid agency of the Catholic Church in England and Wales, and Unanima International, a sister-led non-governmental organisation advocating for women and children, which has its seat at the United Nations in New York. And in partnership with Unanima International, UISG co-hosted an official side event at the UN High-Level Political Forum in July under the banner Leadership for Change, a call to action from sisters supporting vulnerable communities. So meanwhile, consultation and collaboration with CAFOD has supported the development of and the delivery of environmental-focused advocacy training for sisters of the Sowing Hope Network. Finally, our work would not be possible without support from the Global Solidarity Fund. This is a unique alliance bringing together partnerships from across the development sector, the private sector, and Catholic communities. We are glad to be a partner with the Global Solidarity Fund. And we thank you for coming and joining us today here at UISG and also online, and we hope you enjoy the event. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Sister Pat, for such a warm welcome and for getting us off to an inspirational start. So we're honoured to be joined today by the Undersecretary of the Vatican Secretariat of State, Francesca Di Giovanni. Since 1993, she has worked within the Secretariat on issues including migration, human rights, women's empowerment, and communication. And she was appointed to the role of Undersecretary by Pope Francis in January of 2020. Mrs. Di Giovanni, thank you for joining us.
Sisters, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I'm glad to be here with you on the occasion of the official launch event for the statement Sisters for the Environment, Integrating Voices from the Margins. First, allow me to thank the International Union of Superior General for the kind invitation. This event offers us the possibility to celebrate a number of successful initiatives that you have already completed. At the same time, provides us with a space for dialogue and cooperation as we walk together, charting your next invaluable steps forward. Many of your sisters work in the field and are in contact with those living on the margins. This allows you to share in the personal, social, and environmental experience of the very people with whom you work and live the gospel. Indeed, through you and many others like you, the Catholic Church carries out numerous programs and activities in diverse areas dealing with the difficult and interdisciplinary reality of climate change. The voice of the Church in international debates has been and continues to be essential for emphasizing the moral duty and urgent necessity that all of us have to address global warming for the sake of the common good, setting aside merely individual or national interests. Governments and other stakeholders have also taken note of our unique contribution. As you know well, after Pope Francis issues his encyclical letter Laudato Si, we have witnessed an impressive echo and seen not only governments, but also women and men of goodwill responding with fervor to the Holy Father's appeal for a more human, integral ecology. As you testify yourselves, your work is enriched by the consciousness of this new integral vision of the world. This is because the multifaceted and multidimensional reality of integral ecology addresses more than just the natural environment, but the interaction of the various dimensions of ecology, including its environmental, economic, and socio-cultural aspects and human ecology, in order to adopt a more integral and integrating vision. Without this holistic vision and its call to sincere personal conversion, our common home remains in danger. Climate change seriously threatens the livelihood of people today and of generations to come. It's already dramatically affecting the environment, our food, and our water supply, as well as biodiversity across the globe. As you know, climate change is relevant for its social, economic, and political impacts. It affects different aspects of our life, including human health and housing, infrastructure and energy management, education and security, and also the environment in the broadest sense. However, it disproportionately affects those living on the margins. Therefore, if we are to respond effectively, we must devise global, middle, and long-term strategies along with concrete commitments and intergenerational responses to our present and future needs. For these reasons, the climate crisis requires our urgent attention. It also requires that we share responsibility for tackling this pressing challenge now. In this respect, many initiatives, partnerships, and activities exist at different levels. To mention only one, and a rather important one, I would say, as many of you are undoubtedly aware, the OLC recently acceded to the UN Convention on Climate Change and the Paris Agreement in the name and on behalf of the Vatican City State. While this is an important outcome, it is an even more important starting point. Indeed, our participation in the treaty will help ensure that the OLC takes an even more active role in the work of the COPs. In only a few more days, COP27 will start in Egypt. Shortly thereafter, in December, the COP15 on biodiversity will be hosted by Canada. Both are crucial to addressing climate change and to sharing in our commitment to the well-being of our common home. This commitment requires strong and deep collaboration from everyone, starting with the individual all the way up to the international community. These occasions offer us the opportunity to relaunch and foster a multilateral dialogue for real ecological conversion. However, not everyone is equally involved or committed in responding to this epochal challenge. While the poorest and most fragile are the most affected by climate change, they are also the most likely to be excluded from our conversations. We are all conscious of the importance of subsidiarity, and to this end, the participation of civil society and the bottom-up approach to tackle the climate crisis are fundamental. Therefore, let us make every effort not only to recognize, but also to ensure that every voice is heard, starting with the most marginalized among us. Many religious sisters and brothers living with those on the periphery of cities and of society are particularly aware of the connection between the fight against climate change and the fight against extreme poverty. The poorest of the poor inhabit known places, as Pope Francis calls them. They are marginalized not only by the indifference of governments and their partners, but also by climate events that leave them, when they do not lose their lives, without any shelter or support. Listening to the marginalized not only offers us the possibility to have a different perspective, but also a true awareness of their needs. We must not devalue the importance of a more integrated dialogue. Different voices can lead to different solutions. Additionally, better understanding everyone's needs can lead to more innovative solutions and help us to identify problems we would otherwise miss. Therefore, multi-stakeholder dialogue is not only necessary, it's part of our mission. Given the vocation of the International Union of Superiors General to build bridges and create a community centered on Christ and around this good news, I'm sure that these words are not perceived to be empty. Moreover, I would like to reaffirm that these challenges could turn into an opportunity to rethink our attitude towards consumption and production as individuals and as a society. The paradigm of a throwaway culture, which discards what it has used and even abused, must no longer be allowed to dominate our daily lives. Instead, we must recover a more sustainable approach based on sacrifice and a profound appreciation for the many gifts that God has entrusted to our care. In order to reach this goal, a holistic approach is essential, starting with education. I'm speaking not only about Catholic schools and universities, but also in our parishes, religious communities, and among Catholic lay movements and organizations. All of us, in each of our unique realities, can contribute significantly. The lives of women and men religious can truly be an answer to the cry of the poor and the earth. This includes your work in raising awareness and educating people to a new lifestyle that is more essential and respectful of the human and natural environment. It also includes your concrete shared suffering and assistance to the victims of this environmental and human crisis. All of this is extremely important, especially given the spiritual motivation that underpins your work. We know well that you carry the cross of Christ with others and for others, in solidarity not only with those you serve, but also with our Lord. As Pope Francis reminds us, as a spiritual work of mercy, care for our common home calls for a grateful contemplation of God's world, which allows us to discover in each thing a teaching which God wishes to hand on to us. It's from this vantage point that we find the charity, hope, and faith necessary to remain steadfast in our commitment to accompany our brothers and sisters in Christ as they face even the most terrible situation, and not only brothers and sisters in Christ, but every man and woman in the world. Finally, please allow me to thank you, not only for the new commitments you have made, but also the tireless efforts that you have already been engaging in as we navigate today's stormy seas together on the same ship. I wish you a fruitful meeting. Thank you.
Grazie, Dottoressa Di Giovanni. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Educating us, as you say, in this difficult and interdisciplinary reality that is our journey together towards an integral environmental approach, which must, of course, be multidimensional, multifaceted, and intergenerational. So thank you. Our next speaker is Her Excellency Chiara Porro, Ambassador of Australia to the Holy See. Having held a range of diplomatic positions both in Canberra and overseas, Ambassador Porro presented credentials to His Holiness Pope Francis in August of 2020. And we're grateful to the Ambassador for joining us today to give voice to some of the environmental concerns of Oceania, which is one of the regions, of course, most affected by climate change globally. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's really my great privilege to be here at this important launch today, hosted by UISG, and I'd like to say thanks, express my gratitude to Sister Pat and her team, and also the partners that have been involved in this important initiative. I'm always keen to promote the important work being done by religious sisters around the world, particularly on such important themes as climate change. And as an ambassador from one of the furthest regions from Rome, I was extremely keen to participate and contribute to the theme that underpins today's presentation, integrating voices from the margins. As Dr. Di Giovanni mentioned, we meet here today on the eve of COP27 in Egypt, which, as it has done for several years now, will gather world leaders to discuss tackling the most urgent global challenge we have ever faced. The success of COP27 is not a given. Its ability to reach a meaningful turning point in the fight against climate change will depend on governments' commitment to take decisive action. While some progress has already been achieved, we have also seen how political obstacles have previously impeded the best of our collective efforts to drastically cut emissions. It is incumbent on all those present at COP27 to not let down those who are most affected by climate change, to not let down those who are paying the price of its consequences right now. That is why it's so important that we bring the voices of those on the periphery, in the margins, those who cannot walk the corridors of COP27 and influence negotiations. And in that sense, the advocacy of civil society groups and faith-based organisations at COP27 can be truly decisive. We know that the religious sisters which UISG represents are uniquely well placed to collate the testimony of the individuals who are bearing the brunt of climate change. Many religious sisters are active in the most affected corners of the globe, offering humanitarian relief and dealing with the material consequences of natural disasters and environmental catastrophes. Other sisters are doing work that goes to the very heart of the way religion sees and responds to the climate crisis. And so today I was very keen to highlight the work of one of these sisters and her institute, and that's an Australian sister, Sister Adele Howard. Many of you will be familiar with her, but for those who aren't, she's a Sister of Mercy and a leading figure in the Australian Institute of the Sisters of Mercy, as well as a theologian. Her life and work has been dedicated to giving a voice to vulnerable communities, and as she describes it, and as UISG also testimonies to this, building bridges across worlds. So it didn't come as much of a surprise that she had been asked last year by the Dicastery for Integral Human Development to be one of the co-leads of a project on changing perspectives of Catholic theology. The project is called Doing Theology from the Existential Peripheries, and was conceived by Pope Francis. It included an extensive piece of research gathering voices of those on the periphery and looking at ways in which current theological thought should open up to the different experiences of those who are so distant from the Vatican. Sister Adele worked for an entire year collating data and gathering testimonies from voices in Australia, New Zealand, and the wider Pacific. Unsurprisingly, the question of the environment was right at the top of their concerns as individuals, and it touched on the very question of identity and self. She was able to define these beliefs as a form of ecological conscience, revealing the interconnectedness of the people of Oceania and the land where they are from. As the only resident ambassador of the Pacific region to the Holy See, I felt compelled to share some of the testimonies that emerged as part of Sister Adele's research. So I want to show you a quick, short video clip to you all to allow us to listen to some of those voices.
We're built on spirituality. We understand about taking care of country. That's our role, you know, it's passed down through our bloodlines from generation to generation, is to take care of the land. She's our mother. All of our ceremonies, our rituals, our celebrations are all to pay respects to the Creator Spirit, to God. We've had God with us since the beginning of time. Thousands of years before the birth of Abraham, God was here working with my people. I think for so many years, our culture, our language has been suppressed in this country. We have so much to share. Please let us share it. Let our contribution be joyfully received. We're ready to give it. Are you ready to receive it?
My name is Margarita Tawarua, and I belong to Ngā Pairangi, one of the many tribes of Te Awa Tupua, the tribes of the Whanganui River. The river was a very important part of our lives. It was our first road, our first larder, our first wash house, our playground, our first baptismal font. It was a sacred space where our wairuatanga, or our spiritual worldview, literally came through being born of the river and of the land.
If we do not engage with the health of the planet, then the changing climate will affect us all. The destruction, the degradation, the despoiling, the damage that we've actually done to the created world, and especially biodiversity. It's the poor of the world that are going to be most impacted by the changing climate.
Climate change is a big thing right now for us. We are experiencing this sea level rising. Women are the ones to fend for their families. They are the ones who look for something to put on the table. Women are no longer getting what they normally get because of this climate change. You know, sea species are no longer present because of disturbance in the sea. And also the coral. Once those are removed, then there's nothing else left for our people.
My name is Mai Natalia, and I come from Tuvalu. a small island to the north of Fiji, which is highly affected by climate change-related sea level rise. Tuvalu is only 26 square kilometers of land with a 10,000 population. So our language, our culture, our identity, who we are as Tuvaluans or who we are as people from the Pacific, we are determined by the land. So we still have that spiritual connection. So that's why migration, relocation for our people is not easy as what others may think. Tuvalu is literally submerging now. We are heading towards the point of no return.
We give thanks for those voices speaking strongly to us. What their voices did as we listened and listened and listened, they aggregated to such a point that we could not ignore the challenge and the question in those voices, particularly the Indigenous people, because loss of land and their fear of loss of land is a loss of who they are. People connected to land, not as titled owners, but as related in a spiritual connection of presence to the sacredness of the land of their birth. Such is the intrinsic relatedness of self, place, land and spirit in their lives. They cannot exclude the land, lest they exclude their very selves from having existence.
So as you can see, I think that clearly shows how the work of religious sisters in facilitating voices, and I'm extremely grateful to Sister Adele not only for facilitating these testimonies, but also for so eloquently capturing the powerful messages behind them. The loss of our land is the loss of who we are. For many in Oceania, and particularly for our Indigenous people, the discussion on climate change is not simply punctuated by scientific data, by numbers. For many in our region, the discussion of climate change is a deeply emotive one. It goes to the very essence of their spiritual existence and the thread of their livelihoods, their security and their well-being. This year, the Australian government has made a strong vow to take urgent action on climate change. We've set a new target to reduce our greenhouse emissions by 43%, and we're now very much on track to reach net zero emissions by 2050, hopefully sooner. But we are also renewing our commitment to work shoulder to shoulder with our Pacific family to face the climate crisis. In the coming years, Australia will increase climate finance and will advance new partnerships in the Pacific and Southeast Asia. We're boosting our climate financing support to partners in our region, including for climate-rated infrastructure and energy projects. Nobody can deny that collective action is the only way we stand a chance to contain the catastrophic effect of the changing climate. That is why we welcome the Holy See's accession to the Convention and the Paris Agreement in October this year, because the voice of the Holy See and the wider Catholic networks can help shed a light on the urgency of the climate crisis, in the same way that it has done so effectively for successive humanitarian crises around the world. The Catholic Church, and I would say religious sisters in particular, as Sister Adele has shown, is singularly well placed to ensure that the voices of those in the margins are no longer ignored. I want to commend once again the work of UISG, and particularly this initiative to issue a statement to bring voices from the margins to the fore. I hope that the message is heard loudly and urgently at COP27, and that those on the peripheries are suffering the consequences that those on the peripheries are suffering the consequences of climate change right now. That for them, this constitutes an existential threat we simply cannot afford to ignore. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for sharing your own reflections and experiences, of course, the story and the powerful words of Sister Adele, and also these incredible voices from the margins. So now we come to the presentation of UISG's new statement, Sisters for the Environment, Integrating Voices from the Margins. Presenting our statement today, I'm delighted to introduce Sister Sheila Kinsey, who is the coordinator of UISG's environmental campaign, Sowing Hope for the Planet. Sister Sheila is a member of the Franciscan Sisters, Daughters of the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, and she's involved in action and advocacy on a huge range of issues, including poverty, human rights, migration, peace building, nonviolence, and of course, integral ecology. Sister Sheila also serves on the steering committee of the Laudato Si movement and was appointed by Pope Francis to the Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development, where she's a member of the COVID-19 Commission's Task Force on Integral Ecology. Sister Sheila, thank you.
Well, just good afternoon, and thank you for joining us and being with us at this celebratory time. Since 2018, members of Sowing Hope for the Planet have been making tremendous work on the realization of a sustainable development, dealing with those goals and the Laudato Si goals. Catholic sisters, as you have been witnessing, have been in campaigns on climate action and land use. They have divested from fossil fuels and invested in renewable energy systems, encouraging others to do the same. They reduce plastic usage, even particularly the single-use plastics, promoted legislation to protect the environment, and led campaigns against harmful economic and environmental practices in the mining industries. Sowing Hope members have worked with land preservation groups to preserve native seeds, to mitigate damages from extractivism, planting trees for reforestation, raising goats for the ecosystem, and repairing community efforts in many ways. They've grown community gardens and protected public lands and indigenous land rights. With a particular focus then on water-related issues, Sowing Hope networks with and promoted access to clean water, has raised awareness of water pollution and scarcity. They've advocated for regulations to protect fresh water sources and secured wells and pipelines for communities with limited access to drinking water, and worked on projects to clean the world's oceans. Sisters for the Environment, Integrating Voices from the Margins, is a statement intended to reflect and clarify the responses of Catholic sisters for the environment challenges in our times. On one hand, the statement addresses the urgency of the current moment, identifying COP27 on climate change and COP15 on biodiversity as critical opportunities to turn the tide of destruction that is ravaging our Earth, and really looking at other ways to reclaim our Earth and our relationships with one another. And it is really expressed as a deep-rooted, faith-elevated, and faith-driven vision for ecological conversion that has inspired the mission of the sisters for many decades and continues to do so every day all around the world. We call on the global development community to engage with our Catholic sisters in promoting and realizing integral environmental solutions to ensure a safe and thriving future for all people and for our planet. So we want to begin with this statement. Integrate responses to climate change and biodiversity loss, recognizing the interconnected nature of ecological challenges, and in particular, the cascading impact of adaptations to climate change on biodiversity and the exploitation of natural resources. In practice, this means, while embracing the Sustainable Development Goals as a framework for monitoring and evaluation, acknowledging that environmental action cannot be siloed and that a nuanced interdisciplinary approach is vital to safeguard the future of our planet. Addressing climate change and loss of biodiversity with an integrated vision to protect environments and ecosystems, ensuring the climate adaptations do not depend on polluting or harmful mining practices, for example, or on land development that destroys the habitat of endangered species. Acting immediately to halt biodiversity collapse, ensuring that at least half the Earth and its oceans become protected areas by 2030, as well as restore ravaged ecosystems and reduce global dependence on fossil fuels. Achieving global consensus on a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty and concluding a new agreement on a United Nations Global Biodiversity Framework. 2, integrate care for people and our planet, rejecting the anthropocentric vision that underpins habits of destruction, consumption, and recognizes the inextricable link between our environment and ourselves. And in practice, this means when taking action for the earth, ensuring that the dignity and rights of communities affected by climate change and biodiversity collapse are prioritized over national or private considerations of profit and economic expansion. Urgently redressing global inequality through an integrated loss and damage framework which explicitly ties climate adaptation to social justice, recognizing the ecological debt owed by the global north to countries bearing the brunt of our environmental breakdown that they haven't caused. Promoting equitable access to resources for ecological adaptations to increase agricultural resilience and sustain food security, protect access to clean water, and respond to predicted sea level rise and coastal erosion in human-settled areas, and ensuring secure livelihoods and just compensation for workers in fossil fuel industries and other unsustainable sectors of the global economy impacted by the transition to ecological alternatives. And 3, integrate vulnerability from the margins in leadership and decision-making, ensuring the voice of those most affected by environmental breakdown are at the center of global conversations on resilience and recovery. And in practice, this means acknowledging that vulnerability can be a strength and that embedding the willingness to be vulnerable as a core value of responsible leadership can help us to find collaborative solutions for the shared future of humankind. Hearing and heeding the voices of those affected by environmental breakdown, both in recognition of their human dignity and as a pragmatic approach to learning from their resilience. Furthermore, integrating the vulnerable as key players of our institutional frameworks, ensuring that their voices, the voices are featured, the voices of the margin, centrally in global dialogue for change and not confined to advocating from the outside. Therefore, focusing environmental solutions on the needs of marginalized groups, including women and girls, displaced and homeless people, children and the elderly, indigenous communities, and other ethnic minorities. In particular, incorporating suggestions from the indigenous communities to halt or modify projects on or near indigenous land, and ensuring their expertise is included in efforts to mitigate climate change and biodiversity collapse. Recognizing that women religious are uniquely placed to advocate for and with the communities they serve and have a role to play both in bringing local voices into global conversations and in ensuring the global communities are implemented locally and the commitments are implemented locally. Thanks for listening and embracing this commitment. And now on to the testimonies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Sheila, for introducing us to these three key pillars of the new UISG statement, Sisters for the Environment, which are, as you've said, integrating responses to climate change and biodiversity loss, integrating care for people and our planet, and integrating voices from the margins. So now we're going to be joined virtually by some of the sisters whose wonderful testimonies are included in our document. And first, we'll hear from Sister Nathalie Kangaji, who is doing incredible work in the Democratic Republic of the Congo, advocating for communities affected by the mining industry and empowering them as well to advocate for themselves.
In 2008, I initiated the establishment of a legal and judicial aid center in Kolwezi, Democratic Republic of Congo. It is a local organization working for the promotion and protection of human rights, whose mission is to provide assistance to the poor and to people who are victims of violence and human rights abuses. Since 2013, we have been working in the natural resources sector and mainly on mining issues. Environmental protection, climate change, defense of local communities' rights, and good governance in the mining sector are at the heart of our activities. Kolwezi is a mining town with a 60% reserve of cobalt, one of the strategic materials for tomorrow's sustainable energy. In addition to this strategic mineral, the Congo abounds in a diversity of other minerals exploited for the benefit of industrialized countries through their large firms, often in a context of non-compliance with standards, corruption, or similar practices. Mining activities are intense in the region, and we are witnessing systemic plundering and uncontrolled exploitation of minerals without any visible counterparts in terms of development. There's still a great disparity between mining investments in the region and the rampant poverty suffered by the vast majority of the population. The environmental impacts are growing in the region and are dynamic over time, sometimes invisible or latent, and may compromise the lives of future generations. They mainly concern water, air, and soil pollution, the degradation of biodiversity, and the effects on public health. The local communities face a number of problems, including illegal land disposition, forced relocation, physical and economic, pollution, and even human rights violations, and are paying a heavy price. Few companies respect the requirements of the mining code regarding relocation, consultation, resettlement, and compensation of local communities impacted by the mining project. Our mission is to train local communities in the use of all legal claim mechanisms in order to promote transparent and responsible management of mining resources and sustainable development. Advocacy, as a process of influencing decision makers at the local, national, and international levels in order to change policy, is an important mechanism in our engagement. It is not always easy to confront the mining giants who often claim to have management systems in line with international best practices and are supported by politicians. Working in synergy is therefore an opportunity for us to have an additional voice at the highest level. For example, we work with local organizations working in the same sector, but also with international organizations. We advocate for an economy that cares for people, dignity, the poor, and the environment, exploiting minerals to build and not to destroy.
I'm sorry that those who have been following the event in English may not have been able to follow Sister Nathalie in French, but of course you'll be able to rewatch the recording with interpretation on the UISG YouTube channels. And next in English, we will hear from Sister Jyotisha Kanamkal in India, who has been inspired by the Laudato Si encyclical to go out into the communities that she serves and share her vision for ecological conversion.
Impelled by the insight that responding to the cry of the earth and cry of the poor is an integral dimension of my consecration in renewing the face of the earth and building up the reign of God. I have responded courageously to my inner voice in the promotion of integral ecology. My province has registered in Laudato Si Action Platform of Vatican Dicastery and has formulated a 7-year action plan for integral ecology. I strongly believe in the God-given human capacity to work together in building our common home. So let us work together for a healthy planet and a healthy humanity.
So these and other inspirational stories can be found in our statement in the full document, which you have, and of course will be on our websites as well. And of course, these are just some of the many incredible stories that have been collected by Sister Sheila and the Sowing Hope for the Planet campaign through their incredible work of mapping environmental advocacy that's being carried out by sisters and partners all around the world. So now, we'll hand the microphone back to Sister Sheila for the next section of our event, which is really intended to kick off a conversation for the protection of our common home, which we hope will continue into the coming weeks and months. And we have a few questions for our panel. Some of our panelists are here with us in Rome, and others will be connecting online, as you can see. So, Sister Sheila, our 3 questions really to start off this conversation are, first of all, what are the main challenges for the upcoming COP27 and COP15, and what opportunities do you see for taking action on these priorities?
An integral environmental approach is critical, really, to the whole means of making a difference and meeting the sustainable goals and limiting the global warming to not more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. The adoption of a bold global diversity framework that addresses key drivers that deal with nature loss and is indeed, and it is also necessary to secure our own health and well-being alongside that of the planet. So in particular, we hope that COP27 will be an opportunity to discuss the impact of climate change on Africa, as poverty and lack of resources cause the people to be especially vulnerable to climate breakdown and economic instability. COP15, meanwhile, is projected to be the largest biodiversity conference since the Earth Summit in Brazil in 1992. And evidence is showing that loss of nature and natural resources is accelerating. One of the intended outcomes of this year's meeting is the adoption of a post-2020 global biodiversity framework that will provide individual and collective goals and objectives for countries to address the environmental damage by 2050. So important goals of COP15, the Biodiversity Conference, include adaptation of an equitable and comprehensive framework matched by the resources needed for the implementation, clear targets to address overexploitation, pollution, fragmentation, and unsustainable agricultural practices, a plan that safeguards the rights of indigenous peoples and recognizes their contributions as stewards of nature, and finances for biodiversity and alignment of financial flows that with nature to drive finances towards sustainable investments and away from environmentally harmful ones. So other areas that are going to be addressed include economic issues, achieving peace, alternative energy resources, the impact of mining and migration, all these resulting from the environmental impact. No short order for sure, but we need to be looking at these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Sister Sheila. And I want to highlight that UISG has convened and is really leading, I think we can say, a group of sisters who will be at COP27 to share their experiences and to kind of spread the word about the work that they will be doing in Egypt. So do stay tuned to the UISG channels for more information on that. So Sister Sheila, our second question for today is, at these upcoming events and in the future in general, how can global development leaders ensure that they really integrate voices from the margins in their leadership and their decision making?
It's really virtually important to truly, sincerely ask people what they want in an open manner. All voices must be heard, and it's critical that women's voices are brought to the table. Any decision-making process must be carried out with openness and clarity, with all aspects considered. These processes must respect the requests and decisions of those affected. As our own statement says, we believe it is also vital to recognize the role that women religious can play in integrating voices from the margins. Sisters and their allies, brothers and sisters elsewhere, Catholic organizations, faith-based and non-religious partners are uniquely placed to advocate for and with the communities that they serve.
Thank you, Sister Sheila. And our third question for today, before I let you put down your microphone, is what recommendations and ideas can you share for following up on this statement? So what really can we do next?
Well, listen and dialogue. Research and reflect on what we are learning as a means to inform and substantiate our actions. We will continue to draw on the resources of Sowing Hope Planet mapping processes to find out what others are doing and strengthen our connections. Sowing Hope has participated in the African Climate Dialogues hosted by SIDSI, which have addressed concerns around false solutions, food systems, economy, migration, and loss and damage, and has led to the publication of a joint communique for COP27. We will be promoting this communique on our website, and they're particularly concerned about advocacy for loss and damage funding, working together towards an integrated framework then that explicitly ties climate adaptation to social justice. We will also be connected to the UN advocacy groups such as VIVAT, Anima International, and other sister NGOs. So looking ahead, the key challenge is to implement the existing processes. Next year, the UN's SDGs are reaching the midpoint of their intended realization, since they are supposed to be achieved by 2030. In many respects, the SDGs are themselves indicators of our success, or lack thereof, in meeting climate challenges. This midpoint presents a huge opportunity to show how we can bring a truly integrated approach to the climate and biodiversity challenges and their intersecting issues as we work to make a global shift in economic and social paradigms towards a safer future for our planet and for our people. And we certainly will be promoting this through Sowing Hope for the Planet initiatives, as we are very much integrated and connected to the Laudato Si Action platform, which is being hosted and promoted by the Dicastery for Promoting Intrahuman Development. This is a collaborative, integrated action. We are about creating a tipping point for change, and we can do it if we put our minds to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sister Sheila. Wonderful to end on such inspiring words. So next, we're joined online, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, from Dublin, by Sister Jean Quinn, the Executive Director of Unanima International. Sister Jean Quinn is a member of the International Congregation of the Daughters of Wisdom, who's been actively involved in international social justice through a range of initiatives and a range of roles, particularly focusing on homelessness. As we've heard earlier in the event, Sister Jean has been a key partner in the development of this statement and of our advocacy work as a whole, facilitating a co-hosted Unanima UISG side event at the UN's High-Level Political Forum in July. So, Sister Jean, thank you for joining us to address these 3 points for discussion.
Thank you very much indeed, Julia. And it's both a privilege and a challenge to be here, and a privilege and a challenge to go to COP27. The reason being, I'm still waiting on a visa. So if we can have a collective prayer during this session that I get my visa, that would be terrific. I was very grateful to Ambassador Poirot for bringing us the voices of the people, because I think that's really important to any gathering that we have, not to talk about us without us. And I think this afternoon, the Secretary General of the UN just said that those on the front lines of the climate crisis are at the back of the line for support. And that's my own belief as well. And we have to change that dynamic. That's really important. I guess we're going on a pilgrimage as pilgrims to a place of challenge. And as we know that going on a pilgrimage is not easy. The challenge will be to be heard, in the right places with a prophetic voice, and to be able to raise our voices, because that will be the challenge. It's always a challenge in working in a very different space. Sister Sheila mentioned all the issues that we need to address, but we are the people going there as your representatives to raise our voices. We'll also have the opportunity to amplify the message and the lived experience of the people from the grassroots, the people that our sisters tell us about and that we've seen so well in the videos there. Sisters raising their voices and supporting in important places. We also need to speak to the intersections between gender justice and climate justice, ensuring that on the ground realities of women, children and girls are not cast aside or simply limited to one thematic session, Gender Day, throughout the whole session, the whole conference, one day on gender. We're also going to to COP with an urgency. And as we keep hearing, this is the moment, this is the time, and it's the time for action. It's been called the Action COP, actually. And we cannot underestimate the urgency of that. We need a whole society approach and the political will to make good on the Paris Agreement, the 2030 Agenda, Laudato Si, and now the UN General Assembly resolution, which officially recognizes the human right to clean, healthy, and a sustainable environment. That's really, really important to all of us. How do we integrate the voices from the margins? I think that was another question you asked, Julia. People on the margins need to be part of the solution. We won't get a solution without everybody around the table. And that includes civil society, the private sector, UN agency, and COP27. And remembering, don't talk about us without us. I think in terms of looking at what is it we want to bring to the leaders, and what we're looking for is implementation. We've had loads of conversations over all the years of COP. And now it's the need for implementation. And it needs to happen on time and scale, and it needs to be specific, measurable, and impactful. And as we know, and I think Sheila and some of the others have just said, the key is financial assistance for developing countries. If their debt burden is not dealt with during this COP, these developing nations are left unable to invest in climate change mitigation or adaptation. Not only has the 100 billion a year from richer nations failed to materialize in full, very badly supported actually, it has also become clear that the most vulnerable countries are receiving little of what is available. So when we look at what this statement today is going to bring us, UISG leading us in this unique statement, is that it cannot be left on the shelf. This statement needs to be shared with our member states, with the UN agencies, with private sector. And as groups, we need to be able to reflect on what it's saying and how we will integrate it into our community lives, into the lives of grassroots people, those we collaborate with and those we network with. It's a really important document. And I feel as the Executive Director of Unanima International, it's a privilege for us with our 25,000 members in 85 countries to be in association with you during this launch of this statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sister Jean, for sharing your reflections and your support. And of course, our prayers will be with you on your journey and during your time in Sharm el-Sheikh. So up next, we have Catalina Hinojosa Lopez, who is the co-coordinator of the Agriculture and Justice Village for the Economy of Francesco. As well as bringing a vital youth perspective, Catalina is Vice President of the NGO New Humanity and supports UISG's Justice, Peace and Integrity of Creation Commission, which is run jointly with the Men's Union of Superiors General. Catalina, thank you for joining us today. And over to you for our 3 questions. What are the main challenges for COP27 and COP15? How can development leaders ensure they integrate voices from the margins? And what recommendations can you share for following up on this statement?
Thank you, Julia. Voy a hablar en español.
I'll be speaking Spanish. First, I think that after COP26, you may recall some events, but some actions have not yet been taken. Some topics are still pending. One is financing of the losses and the damage caused by climate change today with the increase of the natural disasters. Obviously, the plans that are proposed in other countries have to once again focus on how they will give service to this issue of damage and losses at this COP27. That is why the countries, when they arrive, will have to try to work once again to rebuild this cooperation. And this is extremely important. If we don't get to that point, we cannot take steps together. Another challenge is to especially look to keep an eye on a fund for adaptation to climate change. Last year at COP26, the countries of the global north agreed on doubling their finance commitment to help the most vulnerable communities. This year, we really have to take a turn because we have to try to finance and determine how all these funds will be allocated to the neediest communities. Another element that is also a challenge is to promote responsibility in the midst of this geopolitical tension. Countries will have to demonstrate their progress toward this climate commitment and finance objectives. There are only 23 countries that have actually made changes in their plans to reach the goal of keeping the temperature at 1.5 degrees, and this has to resonate in all of us. In addition, with the war between Russia and Ukraine that has destabilized especially the energy market and caused increased dependence on fossil fuels, this is going to be another challenge that has to be addressed. This is, of course, connected to COP15 on biodiversity. Obviously, biodiversity is still deteriorating despite the actions that have been taken. Unless measures are taken to protect biodiversity, this is going to cause more changes at the climate level and generate more difficulties for communities. We have to continue pushing to transform our relationship with nature, feeling that we are part of it and living in harmony. If we do not change this perspective, we cannot talk about changing reality. Politics, there has to be a safeguarding policy to guarantee the future for the planet and people. How can we do it? There are several opportunities, and one of the opportunities that I see as a young person participating to the economy of Francisco and a young who's trying to build a future is to continue building networks, especially collaborating. What does the collaborating mean? It's involving all the players, especially enterprises, companies, because they too are protagonists for changes at the economic level, to push leaders or politicians to take concrete actions. We've seen that we're talking about the civil society. However, civil society oftentimes stays to a side. We saw that at COP26. That's why we have to look for strategies with other strong groups that have already changed within their policies, their plans, so they may take decisions in a sustainable manner and spread the positive effects. With regard to the second question, I can tell you that we too, as young people, also feel marginalized. we are not part of the decision-making process. We've seen how adults perhaps are afraid to entrust us with something, perhaps because we lack experience, or we may take rushed decisions. But as young people, we risk jumping, and that's where we can do it together. Taking a leap, jumping, means asking leaders for more accountability, being closer to political actors. Marginalized groups have no voice. They've been displaced by society. We have displaced them, and they are not considered when some requests are made. But that is where we all have to feel responsible. If everything is interconnected, this means that we all have to live for everyone, excluding no one. Very clear example. In 2021, with some young people and seniors of Economics of Francisco, we produced a video to ask Chevron to repair the Amazon indigenous communities of Ecuador affected by the oil spill. Thanks to the preparation and these videos during the meeting with the shareholders, Chevron decided to change its CEO, taking a small step to generate big changes. What else can I tell you? Listening to the indigenous groups' voices is a key element, but we have to be attentive because sometimes we use the marginalized groups for our ends. So it is important that if we want to generate changes, we have to create the spaces and not just make them speak, because sometimes we want to speak on their behalf, but we are not giving them a space to do so. And in answer to the last question, how can we follow this process, this statement? I think it's important to include other elements in this aspect, especially from the grassroots groups, through associations, groups of people, local leaders, to meet with power groups, with decision makers, governments, international organizations, companies. If we push from both levels and seek agreements to encourage both parties, we can take faster steps. And that is where the UISG role also is. That is why a UISG declaration must contain experiences and the agreements that have already been made in spaces such as the UN with those NGOs representing congregations. And especially, we must consider the encounter with governments. How can we be closer, knowing that if we pressure intelligently through issues such as sustainability at all levels, we can find common points that can allow to generate change. And lastly, I think it is very important, especially to look at positive news. Usually, everything that is presented are negative cases that disappoint us and move us farther of this fight for climate changes. We, as young people, the more negative things we see, the more we want to escape and go far. So why not present positive news about what is happening to incentivize us, encourage us, and have greater hope? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catalina, for giving us that real sense of balance between the need for hope and engagement through positive stories, but also the need to maintain a sense of urgency. And for those who missed it in Spanish, I just want to repeat one of the key points you emphasized, which is that 23 countries globally have made actual changes in line with the aim of maintaining global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. So if that's not a sense of urgency as we move into COP27, I don't know what is. So our next panelist joining us from Brighton in the UK is Neil Thorns. Neil is the Director of Advocacy and Communications at CAFOD, which is the Catholic Agency for Overseas Development in England and Wales. And Neil, as well, has been an invaluable partner in the development of our environmental advocacy program, helping us to plan and deliver advocacy training to approximately 150, I think, women religious and their partners. Neil, thank you for all your support and for joining us today.
Thanks very much, Julia, and thank you for allowing me to participate in the whole process, which has been an absolute privilege, I have to say, and hearing about the voices from all of the work that the sisters have been doing across the world has just been really inspiring. So I'll go into a couple of points around this today. So some of which have been touched on, so I'll leave those and I'll just do a couple of others. But the first one, when we talk about COP27, and I think we'll have all seen possibly reports in papers and the media around how urgent the situation is getting to. So the fact that the UN doesn't believe that we can keep to below a 1.5 degree world, and that current trajectories keep us to a 2.1 degree or 2.9 degree trajectory. So the point that was well made there about actually we need more countries to come with greater ambition in terms of their nationally determined contributions into that COP27 are really, really important. But I guess the most important one, and I think which obviously often it comes back to money and it comes back to finance, but I think that's never truer than now in the COP27 process. So people have talked about climate finance, and one of the things which is absolutely critical coming into COP27 is this issue of loss and damage. So if you think about loss and damage in a different way, it's really about compensation and reparation. So for many communities, such as in East Africa or some of the small island states, fantastic video that we saw earlier from the Oceania region, people are not really, it's not a question of adapting to the climate crisis anymore. They have to think about different situations. And actually, this is when this crucial element of loss and damage or compensation and reparation come into play. And that's going to be really critical, because I think more and more we see countries of the rich who have caused it and those countries who are suffering most who haven't caused it kind of growing apart. And I think if we see COP27 in context of the kind of global politics and global situation, then that becomes even more stark, where you see the situation of Ukraine, but also the fact that low-income countries have had to deal with and are still dealing with COVID. They are still dealing with the debt crisis, as others have said, and they are still really much at the forefront of the climate crisis going forward. So urgent action, but also making sure that actually people just step up and take on board the situation of loss and damage and the need for urgent finance in terms of that. So that's COP27, and equally the same as COP15. There is an urgency there about nature breakdowns, and the solutions are there. That's the great thing, is that people know what we need to do. They just need to kind of move on them, which kind of leads to the next point that I wanted to bring out, and which is why the statement is so fantastic in enabling us to do this. The great thing about the Paris Agreement, and also with the things coming up to the COP15, is that these don't come from a top down, they come from a bottom up. So ambition comes from a bottom up. It comes from each of the states creating their kind of plans, creating their ambitions, and bringing that into the COP processes. So I think one of the great things about this and the examples that we see in the statement are, how can we influence those national policies, to make those national countries more effective, but also to make those plans coming into COP27 more globally ambitious. So I think that's a real opportunity for us to use this statement, and it would be fantastic to see things like conversations happening at a national level or with elected officials. Certainly I'd be thinking of how we can do that in the COP27 in the next couple of weeks. I'll be there, and certainly this statement will be there in my bag. So I think there's something about using it, making sure that we think about it from a national level and how we build up from the national level going forward, whether that be on things around mining, whether that's around food and agriculture, whether that's around just how we need to shift our energy transitions going forward. And I think there's also those national plans which refer directly into the COP processes, whether that's the nationally determined contributions or whether that's the national plans which deliver the SDGs. All of those things are really important. So we can really use the ideas and recommendations in this statement to make a difference nationally, but from a national point of view, feeding into those international levels as well. And then the voices of the margins is absolutely critical, and something that certainly as CAFOD we hold very much in our heart, and we want all of our work to be speaking on behalf of, or having even better, those voices of the margins right there with us when we speak to decision makers. And I think if we think of the roadmap that we've got ahead of us, whether that's on nature and biodiversity, or whether that's on the climate crisis, whether that's on food, there's the really tough actions which government need to take. They basically involve reshaping whole economies and shifting away from fossil fuels, moving into a better, hopefully, economy which puts people and nature at their heart. And so those voices from the margins are absolutely critical because A, they give us the impetus. So when people are stuck on, is it this word or is it that word, or is it this number or is it that number? Actually, what we need is those voices from the margins which say, you just need to make progress on this. You need to push forward on this because it's our lives here, not numbers, not words. So it's really important, I think, to have those voices from the margins there to push the urgency. But I think the other thing which the voices from the margins critically do is that they give us hope, because often the solutions that we look for, or the solutions that we need, come from those voices from the margins, not from the politicians, not from those people who are having those conversations often in a bubble. They come from those people in the margins because they are living with it day to day. And they are the ones who have already come up with the solutions, either from generations back, as we've heard previously, or just because of the stark reality of the changes which they need to make in their lives and how they're adapting already. So I think that's why the voices of the margins are so important. And that's why this statement is great, because it takes us from that big macro level of what we need to change and brings it down into some of those voices which we need to hear as we're going forward. So thanks very much again for allowing me to be part of this. And I hope to be able to take those voices very much into the COP27 process.
Thank you, Neil, for joining us and for reminding us again that that balance of hope and urgency is possible, and that voices from the margins can be key in helping us to achieve that balance. Our next panelist is Maria Dolores Sanchez Galera, who is the coordinator of the Research and Reflection section of the Dicastery for Integral Human Development. She's part of the scientific committee of the Economy of Francesco and has been teaching law and economics on the Fratelli Tutti specialization course at the Pontificia Facoltà Teologica San Bonaventura here in Rome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thanks to you. I'm glad to be here. I'm happy to be a listener and a learner, because everything has been said. So it's difficult. I should do like Pope Francis said to the young people in Assisi, just make noise. If nothing else, just make noise. So, well, noise should be connecting to what Neil has just said. My talk was addressing losses and damage, which is the really critical aspect of this COP and biodiversity. Future challenges. Our present challenges, people have very clear what the problem is. Our problem is finance, and and there is where we need to address our task forces, from advocacy, from national governments, from regulators, rethinking our economic systems, but also institutional systems. And that's why I'm so glad to be in this discussion today, including voices from the margins, because the margins starts from including, and that was the first challenge that was the beginning or at the origin of starting all these discussions, the Climate Change Framework Conference, was including future generations into these discussions. So the first people from the margins are the people that are not here. For regulators, that was, oh God, how am I going to include future generations? Our constitutional frameworks weren't prepared. Our regulations are not prepared for including voices from the margins either, and that we know, because we made recent distinctions between soft limits and hard limits when it comes to addressing loss and damages. And for hard limits, we are including no reasonable prospects for avoiding intolerable risks. This is when we can really predict what is going to be happening, and for this we need immediate reaction. So, well, the challenges are many, but we really need to rethink our economic system. And I wanted to say that actually, to think about the challenges, have you watched The Letter? So that says everything, and includes, you know, it starts from your tears, and then maybe it takes us to reaction. And I think every government should place this in their parliament before starting new discussions about climate change, energy regulation, energy transition, and then what is, well, about the question or focus to the integration voices from the margins, and how can global development leaders ensure they center the needs of the most vulnerable in their leadership and decision making? This is an incredible question, because every population has the right to be committed to their own questions and problems about progress, and then they have also the responsibility. So how these people should not be included? I mean, how can be the other way around? So only including people from the margins, we can really assess a discussion, a real discussion about global or local development. And other things have been said here, so I'm not going to repeat, but of course the work of faith-based organizations and advocacy has been very important. It's probably the better address noise to make governments react. So that's why this COP is important. The policy is going to be there. It's not that it's expected that it's going to change, everything is going to change, but we need a bigger voice in what integral ecology is, education, a cultural shift, things that have been coming from faith-based discussions, and that is it. I was in London with Neil last week, and we were in the Faith Invest meeting, and there is also a big discussion on this going on. And we need to interlink much more. We need to collaborate. So the word solidarity, collaboration, interlinkage, that's very important now. And I think COVID showed and helped us learn, and every government took the lesson that we need collaboration. We are all affected by the same problems. So that's the problem of humanity. So that's the only way to proceed. And I wouldn't go further because, as I said, everything has been said. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria Dolores, for joining us and for reminding us that key voices from the margins are the voices from the future, that this is an intergenerational fight for the future of our planet and our humanity. So our final virtual connection for today is with Josiane Gauthier, who is the Secretary General of SIDSE, which is an umbrella organization for Catholic development organizations in Europe and North America. Josiane, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate at a distance and save a little bit of my flying hours this year. I appreciate it. And it's been incredible listening to all of you. And so it's very difficult to come in last after everything important has already been said. So perhaps I'll try to give you a few thoughts that they're almost reflections back on things that I heard as well, so that I don't repeat everything my colleagues and friends have already said. I think when I saw the first question about what the main challenges were for the upcoming COP, I was on and the COP27, the COP15, my concerns were maybe on a different level. They were quite on an emotional level. Somebody said about this being a very emotive issue. It is for me as well. I think the main challenges that we're facing are indifference or disillusionment, discouragement, lack of ambition and courage, delaying, again, the actions, the same people talking, saying anything, not doing anything. These are the real risks. These are the ones I'm afraid of. Coming away from this even less encouraged than in previous COPs. This is what I'm afraid of. I'm afraid of losing that belief that we can keep doing this, that we can actually make this shift that we absolutely have to make. Not being inspired, not hearing the real voices, that would be terrible, wouldn't it? That's a huge challenge. If we miss this opportunity to listen to real voices of real people, change the discussion, change the conversation, finally, and have the real conversation we're supposed to be having. This is the challenge. And this has to happen. We have to shake it up. We have to hear something else. We have to hear different voices from what we've heard before. They need their space. This conversation at the COP27, at the COP15, it has to be value-driven. And we can bring that. People in this room and people we know can bring that value-driven conversation, speak from the truth, from the heart, from what's really happening. An uncomfortable truth, but a liberating truth about what we need to do. Obviously, I'm not going to speak about the technical issues because they've all been raised. And my friend Neil has already raised some of them, and Sister Sheila raised some things. I'd like to share maybe a little bit around how we came to a certain focus through the Africa Climate Dialogues, because it was really a learning experience that was a different way of preparing for this COP. Because we have been involved, this would say, in COPs year after year, and we come in with technical briefs. And sometimes we sit down with the other Catholics and we try to find another original way of bringing our messages across and trying to get one more person to listen to us. And sometimes we do, we get a little change of heart and we feel victorious. But this time we looked at it from a different angle. We said, maybe we need to sit down and look at our conversations and our preparation for the COP in another way as well. And this COP is happening in Africa. It's a new context. And I will slow down, sorry about that, I got taken away. We decided that we needed to sit down with the Church of Africa and prepare together. We felt that in previous COPs, we put a lot of pressure on Catholic voices who were few and who didn't have all of the tools to bring all the messages in. We tried to coordinate ourselves at the COP. But this time we said, what if we were to prepare the African church leaders? What if we were to sit with them, sit with each other and listen to each other? And so we embarked on a synodal process of our own to prepare this COP. It wasn't easy. It wasn't easy because lo and behold, we are also in a privileged position. We get to travel to these meetings. We get to be heard. We have high positions where people listen to us. But a lot of our colleagues don't get listened to and don't get heard, depending on the continent they're from or where they're situated. Their stories don't make it. And we feel a responsibility to share their stories, but it's not the same. It's not the same as sharing that space and sharing the power and opening up new spaces for other voices to be heard. So this was part of the process of preparation. And it meant that allowing that maybe the technical issues that we thought needed to be addressed at the COP might be brought up differently from the perspective of organizations in Africa, of the church in Africa. Maybe the order of priority was not exactly the same as the one we thought it would be. So we had to allow that the advocacy might change. It might change us and that we might carry it differently together. So this has been a very important learning experience for us. It's been a very humbling experience for us as well. And it needs to change the way we do advocacy. We need to speak together and really listen. So this is a big challenge for the decision makers as well. How will they listen to the marginalized voices? How can we actually influence the leaders, to carry the voices of the most vulnerable in decision making? This is a very big challenge. This is a very big challenge because it means asking people to stop talking and to listen. And we come from societies that have benefited for a very long time about this power imbalance. We have benefited from it, inadvertently sometimes, unconsciously sometimes. And so to give up that power and to ask our decision makers to say, would you step back and listen for a moment to other voices and their truths and their solutions? This is not an easy one, but I think it can be done. And I think that a group like this one is the best situated, is the best tooled to make that happen. because we believe in conversion and because we believe in human capacity to change and to evolve and to be better. And we know that we have a responsibility to do so. I think we have to model that change ourselves, though. We have to, as well, challenge where we sit and how we participate in these spaces. And we have to challenge these spaces and name them when they're not being democratic, when they're not being inclusive, when they're not being participatory. So that's also part of the advocacy we have to do. We can't just come with messages that are technical, but we also have to challenge the way in which the conversations are happening and who's participating. I think just to close off, maybe what I think we can do with the statement, with the conversations we're having today, with the African climate dialogues, with the many initiatives that have been shared, all the good stories, as Catalina was mentioning. I think we need to keep coordinating. We need to keep building bridges together. I think that is the core. The building the community of solidarity is the model. It is the model. By being together and by being community, we model the change we want to see, where we're putting each other and our solidarity amongst each other at the center of the types of solutions we're looking for. We have to listen. We have to make this statement heard and the other statements. We have to share each other's statements, each other's messages. We have to hold each other up. And I think we could even use this statement, might I add, in the synodal process. Why don't we throw it in there? What if this were to redefine how the church sees itself in the future? Wouldn't that be grand? If the church actually defined itself as the ecological church, as the church of solidarity, truly, a decolonial church? I think we could do something with this. So there's a provocation there. And as women leaders, I thank you. I thank you for standing up and for always doing so. And please keep doing it. We really need you to. So I wanted to say thank you for that.
Thank you, Josiane, very much for voicing that fear that change is not happening, because it certainly feels like we're all very afraid of that, but also for highlighting that so much collaborative preparation for COP27 and for other opportunities is going on. So much listening, so much journeying together, and so much sharing of the power, and that's a reason for hope. So to close our panel today, I want to ask Ambassador Porro if she'd like to share her thoughts on the points we've been discussing.
Thank you. Thank you. Yep. Well, thank you so much, Julia. And I think as the government representative today as well, I feel like I should say just a few little things. But mostly I've been listening, and I've been quite inspired as well by all the inputs that have been given. Although, of course, it is quite disconcerting to think, when we think about this COP27, what's going to come out of it. One of the key takeaways for me, and it has been over the past 2 years that I've been here, is the importance of these coalitions for change. And I think the religious sisters and the groups that they represent, including some of the partner organisations here today, are so important for governments to be aware of and to think of because we need to think creatively now about how we're going to go about this crisis. And so I think for me that's really the value, and I would strongly, strongly encourage with this statement. It gives religious sisters visibility. It gives visibility, it gives you something to promote, and I think use it to demand that seat at the table, as I think Sister Jean was saying, raise your voice and be there and represent, particularly these voices from the margins as well that are so critical. The other point I just wanted to make was in terms of the facilitating voices. It's not just about facilitating the voices. I think as the statement shows, it's about integrating them. And one of the things that I was in the Pacific for 2 years before coming here, one of the things that is very important is you can't just wheel people up to the table. They need to have the skills. They need to know how to influence. And I think that's one of the key things that Australia has tried to do in our outreach and engagement with the Pacific, is particularly with women, I have to say, is build their negotiating skills, build their capacity to influence. So I think that's critical. And that also comes to that question of climate finance, which for me is actually also the key challenge. And I think it's one that I think there was at a meeting we went to on the 4th of October, one of the ministers from Fiji described it as a sledgehammer between the developing and the developed world. And I think that's the biggest risk we're facing right now. But I think, again, here we need to think very creatively, because from my time in India and the Pacific and Africa, one of the things I encountered time and time again was that a lot of this funding, this money that's being pooled at the international level in all these funds, it's not reaching the people. And I think there needs to be much more consideration and perhaps a review is what's needed from the UN, for example, into how climate financing can work better and more effectively. And of course, I think here, one of the other things is we need to get the private sector more involved, because if you think about, I think that it's by 2030, the estimates are that the expected finance gap will be $5.9 trillion. There's no way that donor funding is going to cover that. We need to get the private sector involved, and we need to, and one of the things Australia is doing is trying to facilitate private investment through a range of different mechanisms to be able to encourage it as well. So I think that's very important. And going back to that point of perhaps we need to think more creatively about how we can, what is the best mechanism for the flow of this financing? Maybe it's better if it comes in through the local, national levels rather than top down globally. The other thing I did want to mention, and I think it's something very important, so Australia is bidding to host the COP, I'm not sure if people are aware, but in 2024, and we want to do it collaboratively with the Pacific Island countries. So that's to ensure that they're very much present. Unfortunately, last year at COP26, mainly because of COVID, there was only 4 Pacific leaders there, which I think was a big disappointment. And I think we want to ensure that they're present, that their voices are heard, and we want to do this by co-hosting one of the next COPs together. So hopefully that happens. And yeah, I think that's it. So thank you so much for this very stimulating discussion, and I took away a lot, and I'm sure others did as well. And I really hope that with this statement, we can encourage. One of the other things I think would be really worthwhile exploring is networking with other religious women, outside of the Catholic faith as well. Men do this. Why don't women do it? And we don't do it enough. We don't network enough. And I think we should be thinking about how we can reach out and build these coalitions for change on these important topics. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, and thank you all for joining us today. So to close this session and to send us off towards COP27, but before that, towards refreshments downstairs, we'll hear from Sister Mary John Kudiyirupil, who is the Associate Executive Secretary at UISG. Sister Mary John, thank you.
Dear friends, all is well that ends well. So my task is to end this event well by a few closing words of thanks and a closing prayer. Will be short. This event is part of a program of OISG around COP27 and COP15 and includes African climate change dialogue, about which Sister Sheila mentioned, the webinar on the 25th of October, in which over 100 sisters participated, and a series of activities that will happen in the following weeks. Like Sister Jean and her team will physically be present at the COP27 in Egypt, in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt. And we will also have a digital contemplative spiritual pilgrimage of the event online. So I would like to thank all of you for coming. You have honored us by your coming. Thank you very much. And I would like to thank Her Excellency Chiara Porro for your presence and your contribution, and especially for being on the panel. Thank you for sharing your ideas and challenges with us. Thank you, Ms. Maria Dolores. I will come back to you. Ms. Catalina and Sister Sheila, and the several panelists on the screen, Sister Jean and Sister, of course, who was there, Neil Thomas, Sister Josie Ann, and if I have missed out anybody, please forgive me, thoroughly unintentional. I also thank you for all the, all the wonderful testimonies that we heard. Thank you very much. And we have listened to a lot of things this evening. And we have also had many good ideas and inspirations, at the same time challenges also. And thank you for the marvelous collaboration that we are experiencing right here between OISG and Unanima International, Vivat International, and the Dominican and the Good Shepherd and the Comboni sisters. So, and thank you for the interpreters, the technical personnel, the translators, and everyone. You have all really enriched this evening with your presence. And most importantly, I want to thank the organizer of this event, Ms. Julia Cirillo. Julia Cirillo, and there is Miss Eleonora at the back, Eleonora Insalaco, and Miss Lorenza Cirillo, who have been working for months for drafting this statement, this excellent statement. Yeah. And Julia in particular has invested a lot into it, her lot of time and energy. She's been moving back and forth and sending messages and calling and drafting and editing and drafting again until it reached this final form. Really, thank you, Julia. And we heard Sister Jean saying that she is still hoping to get a visa, no? And we wish her and her team, she will get the visa. We are going to pray now. And her team, we wish them all support, and that we will also be accompanying them in our prayers and with our support. And they will be our voices, and our interest and our passion and our dream, they will take there to the venue. And
Sister Mary, I just got word I've received my visa.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And as we come to the close of this gathering, let us take a moment in silence to reflect on how we can work together to actualize the dream of an integral environmental change. After a brief moment of silence, I will say the closing prayer. The earth is the Lord's and everything in it, the world and all who live in it. For God founded it on the seas and established it on the waters. In God's hand are the depths of the earth, and the mountain peaks belong to him. The sea is God's, for he made it, and God's hands formed the dry land. Let the sea roar and all that fills it, the world and all those who dwell in it. Let the rivers clap their hands. Let the hills sing for joy together before the Lord. For God comes to judge the earth. God will judge the world with righteousness and the people with equity. Loving God, we praise and thank you for gathering us in your name. You reveal your love and care through the created universe and through us who bear your image. We thank you for today, for all that we have heard, seen, and witnessed in this place on Sisters for the Environment, integrating voices from the margins. Help us to live our lives in simplicity, honesty, and in harmony with nature, and in accordance with your word. Give us the grace to translate our dreams and visions into concrete and caring actions in daily life. Bless all our efforts leading up to the summit and beyond. May everyone, and especially those at the margins, benefit from this endeavor. We ask this through Christ our Lord.
Thank you. Please join us for refreshments downstairs and to the right. And thank you again for coming.